Tech Stevens here. Today I'm going to talk about how I structure my Redux store on Angular. If you've got a big enterprise project or even an app that has a lot of state, it can get messy very quickly. So this is to show you how I would structure your Redux. It's not going to go over any basics of Redux. It's going to be a hands-on coding. So yeah, let's get to it. I've created a blank Angular project using Angular CLI. I've also installed the RGRX store here, so if you want to follow along at home, you should install that as well. All my code is always exposed on GitHub for everyone, so you can fork that or pull that or do whatever you want to do with that to see this in action. So firstly, what we'll need to do is we'll need to init the store, the RGRX store itself. So what we do is in our imports, we do store module docs. Visual Studio sometimes will not resolve the store module for you, but it lives in at NGRX store. It's a bit of a tongue teaser to say, especially for me. Great, that will import that, and we just need to do for root because we're going to be using the for feature for the rest of the development on here, and we're going to be using modules to be able to import them into our main app module. So that's it. Great. We've created we've created a new Angular CLI project. We've installed NGRX store and we've imported the init into our app.module module. So let's talk about the actual development now. So I tend to always create a app store folder within the app, mainly because this groups it all, and also it will always be at the top because of the plus. It's a lot easy. It's really easy to find, and I just like that practice. Within here, I always create modules for each store. So if you've got an authentication store, you'd have an authentication store module. If you've got an account store, you'd have an account store module. Modularizing this stuff up just makes it again more clean and more simple working with Angular. So I'm going to go into my store and do ng generate module authentication. This will create me a folder and a authentication module. Great. I tend to always call this authentication store module. I don't really like the name to be authentication dash store. So that's just my preference. You don't have to do that. At this point, we've got our store folder with our authentication store ready to do it. I'm not a huge fan of Angular's Visual Studio's new style, so just to make it easy to read, I'm just going to create a fake folder here, so it's a lot easier for us to see what's going on. Within the store itself, I always create a plus state. Again, to make it easy to get around, you go to the plus store, you go to authentication, then you go, okay, I need to go and see the state, so I'll go to the plus state. Within the state lives three things. Actions, these are the things that Redux needs to be able to update stuff. Reducers, this holds your initial state, but also is the thing that allows you to, which is the thing that listens to the actions and then updates the state within there. And selectors to be able to go and get the values back. So I'm going to start with creating the reducer. So authentication.reducer.ts. I always tend to do a .reducer.actions.selectors. Again, to make it nice and tidy, just like Angular do .modules, .services, .components. I really like that style, so I carry on building it like this. Within here, we will export our feature key. This is which allows things to be mapped, keys to be mapped to stores within Redux. So we're going to put this in a strongly typed place to allow us to not have to write authentication all the time because we might spell it wrong. We'll also export our authentication state interface, make it strongly typed as well. Is logged in, we're going to start with. Will always be a boolean. You're logged in or you're not logged in. And then we'll also create some initial state, so default values, for example, is logged in will always be default false. Obviously, if you've got a cookie or you've got authentication logged in with JWTs, your application will handle that. But for this basic example, I'm going to say every time someone hits the site, they're going to be logged in false. So we've got our state defined and our initial state set up. Before we create the reducer which updates the state, we need to go and create our actions. So within the state folder, I'll create authentication.actions.ts. Within here, I like to create authentication action types, enum types, strongly typed stuff, which hold a bit of context about the update. When you're trying to debug, for example, if you're using the dev tools, if you put this, if you use a string enum here, it will emit some of that information back for you, so you can easily trace where the problem is. I'm going to call this authentication action types, and we're going to have an is logged in updated, and we're going to say authentication. So I always call what the store is in there, so again it's easy to kind of see and filter out. And then I just explain it updated the login state. I explain what that does. I explain what that does there, so when you're debugging you can see it. And also I always create a reset state. For example, if you log out and you want to only update the authentication state, you can just call the reset state action to kind of do that, which I'll show you when I start exposing this for our component to use. Great. I now need to write the actions that are going to be able to call. For example, is logged in updated. So we're going to create a class called is logged in updated, and this needs to implement Redux's action from the store. This will say, okay, it will use the interface here, and it will say that you always need a type, which we defined up there. So public read only type equals authentication type actions dot is logged in. And we also need a constructor because you pass your payload into this, and we know that our payload for this is always going to be a boolean. We only ever want to be able to update state of the is logged in updated to a boolean. And we'll also expose our reset state here. Again, it will take an action. It will be a public read only type equals authentication dot reset, and we just want an empty constructor because we don't need any context here. It's gonna already know about it. We'll then export our types here. So we can then say, okay, any action which is this or this or this or this going forward, it can take that and it'd be a strongly typed parameter in our reducer method. Great, so we've done our actions. Fantastic. Let's go back to our reducer now and let's write the method that is going to do something when these actions are called. So let's export a function called authentication reducer. Now that's going to take a state of authentication state, and it's going to be, if nothing's supplied, it's going to roll back to the initial state, and it's also going to take our authentication action, which was the type that we created there. Perfect. Now we need to, okay, so this will get called when an action is called. It will pass in the parameters that we need. We then need to go, okay, cool, on action.type of, and this is where your enums come into play as well, because again, you're not having to do a string every time, you're using nice strongly typed stuff. So on a is logged in action, we want to keep the state to the same. Imported something. We want to keep the state to the same, but we know that the payload from here, the action.payload has the new is logged in state. So we will say, okay, keep the whole state, but let's change the is logged in state. We also want to handle the reset state that I briefly talked about, and that's just as simple as just returning the initial state. Whatever this returns here in the reducer, Redux is going to grab that and set the state for us. Great, so we've got our reducers, we've got our actions. So we can update stuff, but we can't get stuff yet. This is where your selectors come into play. So if we create a authentication.selectors.ts, and within here, let's create a get authentication state, and it's going to start using the create feature selector to be able to do that stuff. So it's basically going to go, and I'll explain it when it gets here. So if I do authentication state equals create feature selector, again it's built into NGRX. So on authentication state, we want to pass in our authentication feature key as well. Great, so this is going to go and get our authentication state for us to be able to have context of the actual state to return stuff. And this will make sense when I write this method. So we now need to do it get is logged in equals, and then we need to create a selector. Again, to create the selectors from NGRX, and we want to say, okay, cool. So we want to pass in our get authentication state. So it's going to go and get that state. And that means now it's going to have nice, strongly typed parameters for us to be able to return the state. So if I'm a little bit quiet, typing and talking is difficult. So at this point, we've created the create feature selector, which has grabbed the state for us, and it's exposed everything, the whole state to us. But we only want to return the logged in state here, which is perfect. And then we want to make sure that we expose this query back to the thing that is going to be using it. So I tend to like to call it authentication query, have solid namings for it all. So great, we've got actions, we've got things that can update, we've got reducers, we've got which are things that hold the state, but also it has methods to be to react to actions called, and we have our selector to be able to go and grab these values back. Fantastic. Now, what I then create is I go and create something called a facade. So this I use, so let me just create a facade here. So I always call this authentication facade. And Redux themselves do talk about facades and stuff like that. It's what I like to do. And I like to use the injectable built into Angular to do all of this stuff. Just make it so easy to be able to inject the facade to go and expose these methods. I'm not a big fan of having to inject the store everywhere on the NGRX store within your components, within your services. I like to abstract this all to a nice, easy service that you can just inject anywhere to get to it. So in here, we're going to say you should take a constructor of authentication state, great, and that store will come from RGRX store, and we don't need to do anything else with that. And now we're going to expose easy to get to streams for our component to get to. So is logged in, we said is always going to be a Boolean. So if that's the case, we store, we .pipe this, and we'll select using the query that we did, the get is logged in state. I'm using select and store from the ngrx store. And so there's our getter, but we also in here will expose our actions to be able to call as well really, really easily. So update is logged in. Only ever take a boolean, and it will never return anything. And then we just do the store.dispatch, and we use our action is logged in updated, and pass that into it. And then our reducer here will get emitted, and it will go and do what we want to do here. And we'll also expose our reset state, which will do the same. It will dispatch an action of reset state, and then our reducer will pick that state up and handle it. Fantastic. I always use underscores to do all of my stuff. Default Angular doesn't have the same TSC config, TS-lint config. I'm just going to paste mine in so we don't get those warnings, because I am a big fan of the underscore. And some people aren't, and that's great, but I definitely like it on private injectables for sure. Great. So we've got our actions, we've got our reducers, we've got our selectors, we've got our injectable facade to be able to use it. Now we just need to map this all in the module. So firstly, common module is always imported by default, but we need to go back now to our store module, and we need to use the for feature instead. And then we're going to use that nice key that we created to be able to map all of this together. And then it's also going to want our reducer, which does all the work. And the next parameters are the initial state that it takes. So I cannot see much. Let me just move this down a little bit. Great. That's in the wrong place. And that should be there, but that should be there. And we want our initial state of our authentication. Initial state. It should allow me to import it in. I like to call it, we call it initial state in the reducers, but I like to be explicit and cast that to an authentication initial state, just to be super clear. We also will need to inject our provider. If you did use the CLI, it would have done this for you, but I did mine on the fly. So we just need our authentication facade put in there. Great, our module is all set up. We need to go down to the app module, and we now need to make sure that our authentication store module is imported. So it's not, which is fine. We can get it imported. Great. So we've got our store all set up now. So let's go to our component and let's get rid of, so this would have created loads of stuff. I don't want any of this for this demo. So I'm just going to clean it down to that for now. And in here, I'm going to get rid of the title, and I'm going to have my injected authentication facade in here. Great. And I'm going to expose an is logged in stream for the component to be able to have, and this is going to just take in the injected service, and it's just going to be is logged in. Great. So if we go back to here, what we can do is we can is logged in with the async stream. That's going to update all the time. And I'm also going to create two buttons. One is going to be login, which is going to take a click event of now logged in, and it's only going to show if the logged in state is false. Fantastic. And I'm also going to create a now logged out, which is only going to show if logged in is true. And we're going to call that log out. Perfect. So we go back to the component and we create those methods. So we had now logged in, going to return no void, and this is then going to update our state for us in our actions, and also now logged out void update to false. Great. So we've got all of that. We've got our HTML in there. We've got our store set up. So let's see if it all works. So npm start. We'll serve this on port 4200 by default. I'll get a editor up. Served it. Great. So we've got false. You see, we click that, it's true. We click that, it's false. We click that, it's true. We click that, it's false. Now working, it's updating all the stores as we go. One good thing to prove that it's actually working is to install the dev tools. So if I do npm install Redux store dev tools, this will import, and then I can it's in here, import this, and also do some cool stuff with environment variables, saying if it's not a production build, then show the dev stuff. If we restart that, restarts again. Compiled. So if I refresh that, default false. If I go to the Redux store, login, updated logged in state, tells me what it changed to, log out, updated logged in state, tells you what it changed to before, and you can see the store reacting as we go. So that's it. We've managed to install Redux. We've set up a Redux store with reducers, actions, selectors. We've set up an injectable facade to allow us to be able to inject that state everywhere. And we've updated the state and we've proved that it's all worked. A big benefit of going down the route of injectable services and the route of this kind of structure is it really does help when you've got big apps that have a lot of state. I used to just not go down the route of having many stores itself and just had one big store. It gets messy very fast. If you're trying to test that, just that thing, you need everything else, and it just grows and grows and grows. This will really lead you down a really good path to use feature store modules throughout, and also use proper built-in authentication store modules and Redux store modules, and it's abstracted away for just itself. So I really hope you enjoyed this demo. All the code is in GitHub for you to go and grab yourself and see. And yeah, let me know how you get on. Let me know your opinion about it. Like, subscribe. Thank you, guys.